I recognize you and your inner child and the different types of blemishes in 3D reality that kind of topple over the inner child, but the inner child is still there. The quote unquote ancestors, end quote, are still even there, more or less. They come in and out within their own spiritual leisure, respectively. Recognizing the work that has already been done and pausing with that, being chill and still with that, having a new acceptance perhaps with the work that has already been done, the probability of honor that could come forth from the work that has been done, and recognizing very casually recognizing the work that has already been done, so the work that has already been done, it's that's what we're kind of like segueing off of, that which has already been built. And that which has already been built, we're in and out of our own intelligence awareness on what really has already been built and how that phases in and out of our subjective reality, and recognizing the agency before all of the agencies, the quote unquote pre-threshold agency and the balanced GHs, the balanced grahas, before they polarized, and distinctifying their polarization, and before the polarization and in between that was the original agency of balance. And from that original agency of balance, not good, not bad, a topple of a non-balance occurred with a certain higher self individuation. And then from that offspring, unique agencies come forth. And from those unique agencies, collectives come forth. And even more, the more agencies come forth from that, all the way trickling down to what we're calling the quote unquote internet. Because in like the underground, it like, honestly, in like 2018, I already did a podcast of like how like what is the internet, and like if you know, if like, because obviously I know how like data gets transferred, like it's just an acceptance, it's an offering to the new balance of the grahas, and how they more or less within their denominations and their non-denominations, how they phase in and out of their own agencies, and how they come back to the original balance of agencies, God's original agency, the agency before the agencies. And the agency before the agencies, that's the real agency. That's really, really going back to a different type of quote unquote non-duality, end quote. And seeing how non-duality within non-duality, somehow it's still undeniably still harbors the duality in itself, the paradox in itself, the paradox within the paradox. And that paradox within the paradox is just that, this duality within the non-duality. And the paradox within the paradox is God is the original identifier and the non-identifier, the only identifier of the non-identifiable. And as he's the original identifier of the non-identifiable, everything from that standpoint comes to existence. And as he's doing that, he has his own dualities, and he's playing within the material reality, which is every one of us, because the soul is of him. And we have a unique relationship with God, pretty much exclamation mark, period, exclamation mark. And but we just have like toppling blemishes over our inner child, and the inner child within all of our different higher selves respectively. That's your unique relationship with original source creator, most respectively. And the paradox within the paradox is simultaneously there is no motive. There's no such thing as a motive at all, because there's only a motive within the identifier. But there's two different types of identifiers. There's God, the original identifier, and then everything else that has a natural automatic individuation process that just identifies themselves different from their source from and to God. And that's the identifier. And from that's how motives are originated. So this is the origin of motives, and seeing simultaneously God is participating and playing with those motives, but simultaneously doesn't have motives because the motive is, it doesn't exist because the other doesn't exist gradually. But that's the paradox. It's like we exist in the non-existence. The non-existence exists within the existence. The paradox. We have to get real with what duality, reality, life is. That's what's happening. There's this temporality in different contexts that's happening throughout our life. And that temporality is being registered from duality, from a non-duality. And and that's the original source fuel for us to even keep going. And we all have different methods to go to get that source energy in the surface level duality planes of density. And there's a myriad of ways of how the unique specimen could cultivate energy. If that's not fucking obvious enough, excuse my French. But the thing is, it's like, how do we leverage out of the different contexts of samsara? That's the whole thing with like whether we have an intelligent surface level front of that or not. That's the whole thing. Like that's what life is like, pursuing in itself, some type of non-spoken liberation within your programs and conditionings of what your chakras have been through spiritually and mundane like respectively. And somehow there's like different types of mechanics and different types of layers of mechanics that the individual micro soul, individual quote unquote jiva soul, end quote, without the baggage perception, is going through. So I'm going to shout this cat out too. I only read half this book a long time ago, but now I started in the half book where he's like playing with the tiger. And I'm going to finish the second half of the book. But this is like the this is like the rudimentary book for his lineage. And this is just his relationship and how he's coming out of, you know, whatever his perception and however he articulates it with source is. Because no matter what the sage is talking about, they're all like, somehow they're all referring to like a particular type of source. And that particular type of source has their perception. They're explaining their unique perception on how quote unquote source, end quote, is preserving all of this stuff respectively. And there was another point I wanted to make as well, which I will make. Let me just open a page, see what happens. I started, and when I first opened this book a couple of days ago, where I wanted to read it, it was talking about just like physical cleansing and stuff. So obviously, like within physical cleansing, that's the tedious part, and I think I speak on this like in an Instagram podcast. It's not all about physical cleansing. Like we have like reality karma to work on, you know, like reality karma, quote unquote, end quote, that gets in the way, you know, quote unquote, you know, metaphysically, quote unquote, shiitake mushrooms happen, end quote. But anyways, and then, you know, it's not necessarily focus on the good things. It's focus on the correct knowledge and the correct information. That's a tier above focus on the good things, because the correct knowledge and information that gives rise to clarity, and clarity gives rise to real quote unquote positive emotions and feelings, end quote. So these are real positive emotions and feelings from, end quote, from a different type of like metaphysical science respectively. And that metaphysical science for the correct information and knowledge is saying the correct information and the correct knowledge is like referring to like how there's a different system, you know, that's being operated when a planet falls into a certain I Ching gate. So if Mercury is in gate 13, Fellowship of Man, last year, or like, you know, somewhere like last year to like 2 years ago, Saturn was in gate 13. So that's why in the beginning of this video, I'm like, recognize the work that has already been put in. What we've already been kind of like grooming within our work effort was within between all these different agencies and God's original balanced agency. In between that, there's a mutable evolution type of working that was working towards, whether they knew it or not, unconscious or conscious, knowing or unknowing, within the energies of like Saturn being in gate 13 in Aquarius like last year. And I did a Facebook video particularly on just that, and it was what it was. I don't know how long it was, but it was, I felt that it was quality, maybe, and it will get reviewed later. But so that's why I'm like saying, recognize on the work that has already been done and honor that, perhaps. And now Mercury, now the collective communication is like, okay, there is a possibility in the higher octave of it, of like, you know, seeing eye to eye on a global level. Like Mercury in Aquarius is like letting us see eye to eye on a level, but how like that particular communication, you know, beacon could get kind of like could have just a general shadow, a default shadow, and from that general default shadow, different things are being created from that shadow of how Mercury is in Aquarius, Mercury is in gate 13, Mercury is in the fellowship of man. So it's like we're having the communication of like, this is like human spirit of evolution. This is human evolution spirit shit right here. That's what, and how like we've been like kind of like naturally groomed to like, you know, solve some type of building project. Like I don't know the exact dates, but Saturn was in this gate, and who knows how long like a planet is in a gate. So it's like we have to ask, like, you know, the respective HD community, like, how long is each planet in each gate, and how is it and why is it that they could go backwards or forwards, and like what are their why do they have the orbit time that they have, the orbit time to travel all the constellations that they do. So this is for the mature, natural, new, modern HD community, because obviously for some reason there's like, even though it's a great community, there could be just like, you know, there could be like a non-maturation within, like, you know, seeing the clarity of like how someone could just be trying to throw something at your character for some whatever reason without really understanding what the real different goals and objectives are within the original foundation of the system, and within how like that system is applauding and welcoming the experiment and the feel and the proper propositions to come and be about in the first place, because that's what it's for. You know, a system is created for just that, you know, for, you know, for the mechanisms to work in a certain way and for the experiment to actually be done. So that's why it's like, I'm like, you know, I'm trying to like, I don't know, like when I exactly like heard of the initial download, it was like somewhere like, you know, around 7 years ago, more or less, you know, and only like, you know, like, I guess, you know, only like, you know, the quote unquote, you know, only quote unquote Google end quote could tell, like, you know, when like, you know, the data was, you know, precise respectively. But that's why I said quote unquote end quote, because it doesn't have to be just that, you know. So it's like so like whether I did the experiment correctly or not, whether I've, you know, tried my best to follow my intuitive authority and my, you know, my humans, you know, I guess quote unquote, yeah, like quote unquote feel good sensor end quote, whether I did that or not, who's to really say if I did that wrong or not? You know, they didn't know what I was responding to. They didn't know what I was like, quote unquote reacting to end quote. But like, I still welcome like people's balance. Like, I still welcome constructive criticism. I still like recognize like where you could be coming from. I still welcome your perspective and perception if it's in like some type of maturity, you know. I still welcome that stuff. But like, but whether I did the experiment correctly or not, I still learned from different types of like setbacks and, you know, failures from me just knowing about it. Like in like, you know, when the 7 years happened, you know, I'm like, I'm coming out of like just knowing, just having it. It's not about if I did the experiment wrong or right. I got an initial download from that particular exchange transition of me knowing that system. And now 7 years has passed. And now I'm kind of just kind of like kind of surfacing out of that. And now I might need to restart it, you know, with like more or less. And I'm just, you know, quote unquote, thinking out loud, end quote. But with me saying that, it's like, who, like, I'm saying that for a spiritual intention, is saying that because something is trying to like constructively organize things. And as I try to constructively organize things, if we can't vote for something like that, then like what's the point of like even like having a preference, you know? And that's like that could be kind of like a flobber knocker or something of like an oxymoronic kind of like statement, you know, and beyond. But within that oxymoronic statement, what I'm saying is like there's preferences for a reason, you know. There's preferences because you want what's best for you. So if you want what's best for you, wouldn't you have to ask like, how is this going to be organized to my catering? How is this going to be organized to my liking for real, and the real sovereignty and the real rhetoric authenticity and the real authentic rhetoric without just saying it? Thank you very much. And I'll come back. I'm going to the underground. Thank you guys.